Hi, and welcome to this fireside chat. We have Marielle Beyer, who's the head of global procurement at Roche. I'm a technology reporter at the FT. My name's Cristina Criddle, and I'm really excited to hear from Marielle, who has such a great wealth of experience. I want to know how she's using technology to transform procurement at one of the largest global pharmaceutical companies. So thank you so much for joining us today, Marielle.
Hey, Cristina, and hello, everyone. I'm very excited to talk about this topic.
And since joining Roche in 2012, you really have used data and digital to transform the teams. Can you give us a little bit more detail about the kind of innovations that you're using and why it's so important to incorporate technology into this?
Yeah, Cristina, that's exactly the point, right? It's about incorporating the technology bit into the overall operating model. That's really what we have been driving as part of our transformation. So on one hand, assessing our operating model, and on the other hand, driving the digital transformation in support of that. So our operating model has a few critical components. So number one, we want it to be more customer-centric and operate on a much more flexible basis. And number two, we are a chapter-based agile organization, which requires novel ways of working. And the actual work across our organization gets done either in communities, networks, or squads. Now, obviously, in order to transform to these new ways of working, we had to make a conscious investment into creating new capabilities. And we were very clear that those new capabilities needed to be fueled by technology. So to give you an example, if you want to engage with customers and stakeholder groups differently, and you really want this excellence in how you engage with them, we said we needed to kind of rethink our whole customer relationship engagement, and we brought in a technology to support that. Another example, because I highlighted it earlier, we want to manage our organization based on a demand and capacity perspective. And in order to do that, we need a holistic portfolio of everything we do and an assessment of the capacity that's available, right? And so again, a conscious investment into technology. And that goes on throughout every area where we made investments. We have an insights and enablement chapter really to enable procurement to work differently. This is also where we connect solutions to actual business needs or opportunities. And in that chapter, we have today a center of excellence for negotiations. We felt that is an area we needed to invest in. And we're now leveraging a technology and actually co-developing a technology where we can do workflow-enabled negotiations at scale. So you see, that's just a common thread. These two things have to come together really to achieve the value that you want to get out of your respective ways of operation.
And another really interesting thing that you've been doing is partnering with startups. Can you tell me a little bit more about how this partnership and this kind of model can generate value not only for the company, but also for suppliers and customers?
Yeah, and that's a super exciting space for us. You know, this is where I think procurement as a discipline is so exciting because, you know, it's a constant evolution. How can you work differently? How can you generate value? And this aspect of scouting for a new supply base, for alternatives, for technologies that can be interesting for procurement and or our business is so exciting. So I will focus the answer on two parts. One, how are we as a procurement function leveraging startups? So I mentioned earlier already, you know, very conscious investments really to make our ways of working effective. And our digital strategy in a sense is that we have a digital backbone, right? Your standard S2P, source to pay type functionality or contract to pay type functionality. We just need that to work. Yeah, and we want a majority of transactions and use cases to go through that backbone end to end quite flawlessly. But we, of course, have realized we need bolt-on solutions. We need, specialty technology to help us excel in certain areas. I mentioned already portfolio and resource management, customer relationship management. We're working with a startup also in the area of supplier relationship management, and of course the negotiation bit that I alluded to. And then on top of that, what we found very, very valuable for our organization, and not least as a thank you to Digital Procurement World, the connection into a Scout, a technology and startup Scout like Scout Lab, where we've actually placed specific business challenges that we experience in procurement. And many of you will have had those same issues, be it vendor master data or questions of supplier onboarding, et cetera. And through the network that Scout Lab has, we kind of did a crowdsourcing to, how to attract a novel technology and potentially a partner for us to address these very specific issues. So something I would highly recommend to everyone who's dealing with these, the friction and the rub in the system. And a second thing, and probably much more important, is that we've really been thinking how we can bring these novel suppliers and supplies, but also technologies, and create meaningful connections in our businesses. So in the various areas in the business. And we've partnered with internal innovation labs and other groups on a startup day, for example, where we had very specific business challenges laid out, and we invited startups to do a pitch. We always invite startups to our procurement supplier days, and we've spent a lot of time thinking about how the engagement process can look like for startups that are faced with a very complex, large corporation, right? And how we can support them, in scaling up their capabilities. And just to give you an example, out of the work we've done with startups in the recent years, we're actually at a point now where we're piloting a 3D bioprinting solution in one of our research areas, which is super exciting. And we're also working on a lung cancer engagement application in LATAM, and all of that through the connections that procurement have made with the business. So definitely an exciting space for us.
Fascinating. And I know you have such a huge experience in this area. You've been in procurement for nearly 20 years. But obviously the past year, even just the past few months, there's been this sort of rapid change. I wonder, how can the industry adapt to the current times?
Yeah, this is an interesting one because, these past 2-3 years have been unprecedented. I think they have taken us all by surprise as individuals as well as professionals, and they've presented very meaningful challenges. And you may have heard me say this before, but I think the procurement teams out there, wherever you look, have done an absolutely stellar job to navigate these unprecedented and highly volatile times. I mean, I've been deeply, deeply impressed, and it has certainly put or started to shine a light on procurement as a function throughout this crisis. But there's a but. It hasn't really helped, or it hasn't really accelerated our desire to transform, because a lot of the crisis management has a very operational and tactical flavor. And so I think now is a really good time for us to be forward-looking, really, and take the strategic agenda again and focus on what we need to do in the area of talent and digital, really to advance our function overall.
And to kind of take that view, while there is, high inflation, supply chain issues, worker shortages, what can leaders do in these situations to really focus on the long term and power on?
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, I always find that when a new challenge presents itself, and that is now inflation, before it was COVID, right? and the inflation again that we're facing now as a result of the Russia and Ukraine crisis, we tend to react, right? And how the question is, how do we get ahead of this, right? How do we embed risk management in our decision making? How do we anticipate certain trends? How do we look at things not in a static view, but really from a simulation standpoint and a scenario standpoint? And I think there's 2 or 3 things that can help there. There's the capability aspect again, right? You need to train that muscle, not to react, but try to get ahead of things. And the second thing is there are so many helpful tools out there and technologies, right, that help you, give you the insights out of a really good piece of analytics. They help you, with kind of the whole prescriptive or predictive modeling. They help you with building scenarios that you can really include in your decision-making process. Now, the challenge or the magic lies in using those effectively, right? And so I definitely think this presents a tremendous opportunity for us also in how we use tech to really get ahead of these kind of things.
And obviously I'm super interested in tech and I'm a big proponent of it. And I wonder how quickly you think that companies should be accelerating their digital strategies and what kinds of technologies could be helpful. Like AI is something that's talked about quite a lot as well. How useful is that?
Cristina, I think there's only one way for us as a procurement function to remain attractive, to be really the true value contributor, and that is to constantly adapt to the changing expectations and to the changing environment, to constantly upskill, reskill. And in order to do that, you need to create space, right? And I think the times where we're excellent at sourcing or we're excellent at managing contracts, especially where you have a heavy focus on operational type work, are over, right? We need to start to leverage these novel technologies that have that smart AI component, really to introduce a new degree of automation in that. And I encourage everyone to look into that. And with that, there's a logical consequence. The standard sourcing profile or profile of a sourcing manager or the standard profile of a contract manager, it has to evolve because there's many other really cool things out there where we can probably even create greater value, right? We talked about risk already. There's sustainability, stuff like inflation, other things, but you need to create the space for that. So we are definitely playing around with these concepts, right? How can we further automate our sourcing and contracting capabilities, our negotiation capabilities? There's certainly a way to go, but I will put my money on that.
And by creating that kind of space, you're kind of opening up opportunities for staff. How do you get teams into the right mindset of sort of really encouraging and enhancing this digital experience?
As an individual undergoing change, right? Because a lot of change is happening, but also as a leader driving change, I think that has been the biggest and still represents the biggest challenge, because mindset is, that is a journey, right? It is linked to behaviors. It is linked to role modeling, creating the space where people can experiment with that, where people can grow, where they can also fail, and there's no consequence attached. And I would say we've done a lot in the area of mindset and behaviors, trying to embed those into our ways of working. A couple of things we've been focusing on at Roche are the enterprise thinking and also the entrepreneurial mindset. But it's also just, like I said, giving some space for individual learning and development, because that's very different from person to person. Now, I will say not everyone's made for that. Not everyone's made for those ways of working. And having said that, I think, and linked to the prior question that you asked, you need to create a little bit of space to bring in new capabilities, a fresh mindset, a fresh view, and kind of move away from the, kind of very procurement-centric profiles that we've had in the past. And so for me, there's different ways to achieving that. A couple of exciting ones are the partnership that we have with Digital Procurement World on the Next 100 program, really understanding who are those young procurement talents, whether they come from corporate or consultancy or, are from graduate programs. We're super intrigued to understand what that talent looks like and the value they can bring and the perspective they can bring into an organization, but also excited, to help act as coach, as mentor, as these young people try to navigate the complexities of an enterprise, for example. And another program that we're launching next year is a rotational procurement program for postgraduates. Seek me out on LinkedIn or find a different way to connect with us, where I'd encourage you to look into that program. It is really about giving young talents who have an interest in the profession of procurement exposure to many different areas and fields, and help them, find their place, their sweet spot where they can have the greatest impact, and hopefully also some fun along the way.
I'm sure you're going to be inundated with requests now. And obviously, given your wealth of experience, lots of people will be watching and potentially just realizing the value in technology, but not quite sure how to go about it. What would your one piece of advice be to leaders in procurement to kind of implement technology to create value and growth?
There's many, but I will try to keep it very simple. I think we just have to learn to be bold. And with, and I'll leave it at that, because, being bold comes in many forms, but I would say be bold.
I can't agree with that more, and wonderful to hear from you. And that's perfect advice to end the session on. So thank you to everybody for listening. And thank you so much, Marielle Beyer, for coming and speaking to us today.
Thank you for having me, Cristina.